I am Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, known to the world as Mahatma, the Great Soul. My life, born on October 2, 1869, in the small coastal town of Porbandar in Gujarat, India, has been a journey of transformation. From a shy, insecure boy to the leader of the Indian independence movement, I devoted my life to truth, nonviolence, and the fight for freedom. It is through the triumphs and struggles of my life that I came to understand that real strength lies in self-restraint, compassion, and unity. I was born into a family of modest means, but one rich in moral values. My father, Karamchand Gandhi, was the Dewan chief minister of Porbandar, while my mother, Putlabai, was a deeply devout woman. She was my first teacher, instilling in me values of compassion, fasting, and prayer, which would later define my life. My family followed the teachings of Jainism, emphasizing nonviolence, ahimsa, and truth, satya. Ideas that shaped my thoughts and actions throughout my life. As a child, I was unremarkable in many ways, quiet, shy, and not excelling in academics. In school, I struggled to be at the forefront. I was a tender, introverted boy, far from the public figure I would later become. I once even lied to my parents, stealing a piece of gold from my brother, only to confess my wrongdoing out of guilt. My father's forgiveness and my own sense of righteousness began to guide me toward a deeper understanding of my moral compass. That incident taught me the value of truth, an idea I would carry with me forever. At the age of 13, I was married to Kasturbai or Kasturba, an arranged marriage by the customs of our time. We were both children, and our relationship began in a rather immature state. Yet, over the years, Kasturba became a vital part of my life, serving as my partner, confidant, and the person who stood by me through all my trials. She understood my ideals, supported me when others questioned me, and shared in the sacrifices of the freedom struggle. In 1888, my father's dream for me to become a barrister led me to England, where I enrolled at the Inner Temple to study law. Leaving behind my family and the comforts of home, I was filled with trepidation as I faced a strange land with its foreign customs. I found myself torn between the values of my Indian heritage and the Western lifestyle that surrounded me. Though the adjustment was hard, I found solace in books. I joined the Vegetarian Society in London, where I met a circle of intellectuals who introduced me to the works of John Ruskin and Leo Tolstoy, whose ideas would greatly influence my later thoughts. I also studied the Bhagavad Gita, a Hindu scripture that would guide my entire life. The teachings of nonviolence and selflessness in these books resonated with me, planting the seeds of my future philosophies. In 1891, I returned to India, but my early attempts to establish myself as a lawyer were marked by failure. I was unable to earn a steady income, and my experiences with the legal system were disheartening. But fate had other plans for me. In 1893, I accepted an offer to work for an Indian firm in South Africa, which would prove to be the turning point of my life. It was in South Africa that I truly encountered racial discrimination. One night, as I traveled from Durban to Pretoria, I was thrown off a train for refusing to vacate a first-class compartment, even though I had a valid ticket. I was humiliated and forced to wait in the freezing cold. This event marked the beginning of my long struggle against racial injustice. In South Africa, I encountered the brutal oppression of Indians, who were treated as second-class citizens. I soon realized that my fight was not just for my own rights, but for the rights of my entire community. There, I developed the philosophy of satyagraha, a concept I had come to understand in the years before, which means truth force or soul force. It is a form of non-violent resistance that calls for steadfastness, courage, and patience in the pursuit of justice. I organized the Indian community into nonviolent protests against discriminatory laws, such as the passed laws that required Indians to carry identification and restricted their movement. Through these protests, I endured arrests, beatings, and humiliation. Yet, the more I faced adversity, the more resolute I became. My struggle in South Africa lasted for over 2 decades, but it was here that I became the leader of the Indian community and formulated the principles of nonviolent resistance that would later shape the Indian independence movement. In 1915, after over 2 decades in South Africa, I returned to India, where I was welcomed as a hero for my work in South Africa. Yet I soon realized that India was in an even more dire situation under British colonial rule. The country was suffering from famine, poverty, and exploitation. Indians were treated like subjects, their rights trampled under British laws. The British controlled every facet of life, and India's natural resources were siphoned away to fund Britain's empire. I realized that I could no longer live in peace while my people suffered. My return to India marked the beginning of my struggle for independence. I shed my Western clothes, embracing the simple attire of a dhoti, woven by hand from khadi, homespun cloth. This was a symbolic rejection of British-made goods, which I considered a sign of India's subjugation. My first major movement was against the Rowlatt Act in 1919, a law that gave the British the authority to arrest any Indian without trial. My call for peaceful protests met with brutal repression. On April 13, 1919, the British troops under General Dyer massacred hundreds of unarmed Indians at Jallianwala Bagh in Amritsar. The massacre stirred my soul and deepened my resolve. It was a turning point in my life, as I knew that only through nonviolent resistance could India ever be free. In 1930, I led one of the most iconic movements of my career, the Salt March. The British imposed a tax on salt, a basic necessity of life, and prohibited Indians from producing their own salt. In protest, I led a 240-mile march to the coastal town of Dandi, where I symbolically picked up a handful of salt from the sea, defying British authority. This act of civil disobedience inspired millions of Indians to break the salt laws and sparked widespread protests across the nation. The Salt March was not just about salt. It was about reclaiming India's dignity, asserting our right to self-rule, and resisting an unjust foreign power. The British were infuriated, but they could not stop the tide of change. The movement gained international attention, and India's freedom struggle reached new heights. As World War II raged on, I became increasingly frustrated with British reluctance to grant India independence. In 1942, during the war, I launched the Quit India movement, urging the British to leave India. The British response was swift and violent. I was arrested, along with many of my followers, and sent to prison. But even behind bars, my spirit remained unbroken. The Quit India movement was a cry for freedom, for the rights of the Indian people to govern themselves without foreign interference. Although we did not achieve immediate independence, the movement galvanized the nation. It was clear that the British had lost control over India, and independence was now inevitable. On August 15, 1947, India gained independence. It was a moment of joy, but it was also a moment of sorrow. The country was divided into India and Pakistan, and the resulting partition led to widespread communal violence, with millions of Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs displaced and killed in the bloodshed. I was devastated by the violence and the partition. I spent my remaining days trying to heal the wounds of the country, urging Hindus and Muslims to live in harmony. I fasted to bring an end to the killings, and though my efforts saved many lives, I was unable to prevent the full extent of the destruction. On January 30, 1948, while on my way to a prayer meeting in New Delhi, I was assassinated by Nathram Godse, a Hindu nationalist who believed I had betrayed the Hindu cause by advocating for Muslim rights. My death was a tragedy, but my work continued through the millions who followed my teachings of nonviolence and truth. I am Mahatma Gandhi, a man who sought to bring about change through love, truth, and nonviolence. My life was far from perfect, filled with personal sacrifices, failures, and moments of doubt. But my unwavering belief in the power of nonviolence shaped the future of India and inspired countless movements for justice and peace around the world. I have always believed that true freedom is not just the absence of oppression but the presence of love and justice. I fought for India's independence, but I also fought for the dignity of all human beings. My life was dedicated to these ideals, and my hope is that future generations will carry them forward.